He fired a taser at a paralyzed veteran just because the man dared to take a quiet walk with his son. Mark Shields, a fake officer with a store-bought badge, thought intimidation would keep everyone silent. But 14-year-old Lucas hit record and turned a quiet act of courage into a nationwide reckoning. But just wait until you see how this story twists, and why justice, in the end, didn't just speak. It stood tall. Saturday morning crept in slow and quiet, the golden light slipping through rows of tall California pines like it was afraid to disturb the peace. Birds chirped above the quiet hum of sprinklers kicking on, and somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower buzzed to life. In a quiet cul-de-sac tucked inside a gated community just outside San Diego, 14-year-old Lucas Hendricks pushed his father, Wade, in a wheelchair down the narrow concrete path behind their row of townhouses. This was routine, same time, same route, every Saturday. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was understood. Wade, a former Marine with shrapnel in his spine and a chest full of military-grade scars, didn't talk much in the mornings, and Lucas knew better than to fill that space. Wade wasn't just a veteran. He was that veteran. The one who kept the neighborhood safe when the power went out during a storm. The one who helped dig out Mr. Patel's car during the floods. The one who never raised his voice, but whose presence was enough to make grown men pause before cutting in line. Everyone respected Wade. Everyone but one. Mark Shields. To the uninformed, Mark might have looked official. He wore cargo pants, black boots, and a mock police vest, with a bright yellow HOA enforcement patch across the front. His badge, bought online, his authority, completely self-appointed. Mark wasn't a cop. He wasn't even elected to the HOA board. But ever since someone let him monitor the community pool rules, he started patrolling like he was SWAT. He printed violation notices, barked orders, and loved nothing more than finding someone he could corner, correct, and intimidate. And nothing made him angrier than someone who didn't flinch. When Mark saw Wade and Lucas on what he called the maintenance corridor, a 5-foot-wide path between the buildings that looped around the back, his eyes narrowed. It wasn't marked as off-limits. It wasn't gated. But Mark had decided long ago that this path was his jurisdiction, and today it was being trespassed by a man who refused to acknowledge his imaginary authority. He stormed over, boots heavy on the pavement. "Hey," Mark barked, voice sharp and cocky. "This is private property. Turn around." Wade didn't stop. He didn't even blink. His voice was calm, measured, like someone defusing a bomb. "I live here," he said. "My son's just taking me for a walk." "You don't get to walk wherever you want," Mark shot back, his hand already moving to his side. "Rules apply to everyone." Lucas tightened his grip on the handles of the chair, but Wade raised one hand gently, still calm. "Is there a real problem here?" Mark's face flushed. He didn't like being questioned, especially not in front of a teenager. "Get that chair off the path now, veteran," he snapped, and before either of them could react, his hand jerked upward. A crackling burst broke the morning air, a jolt. Wade's body convulsed, his shoulders snapping back as the taser fired. The chair shuddered beneath him. Lucas screamed and dove to catch his father as he slumped sideways, barely conscious, breath ragged. The wheelchair tilted, metal clanging against the pavement. From nearby balconies, heads turned, curtains shifted, phones came out. One neighbor, a young woman in a bathrobe, started recording, her hand shaking. Another man yelled from across the street. "What the hell are you doing?" Mark didn't answer. He holstered the taser and straightened his vest, suddenly aware of the crowd forming. But it was too late. Lucas knelt beside his father, voice cracking as he begged him to stay awake. Wade's eyes fluttered, pain etched across his face, but he managed to whisper, "I'm okay, son. I'm okay." But he wasn't, and Lucas knew it. All because one man couldn't handle being ignored. One man needed to feel powerful, even if it meant targeting a veteran in a wheelchair, a father with his son, on a morning walk. And in that moment, everything changed. The ambulance took 11 minutes to arrive, but to Lucas, each second stretched like wet cement hardening around his chest. He knelt beside his father on the pavement, hands trembling as he clutched Wade's calloused fingers, watching his face pale beneath the morning sun. Wade's breathing was shallow. His eyes blinked slowly, like the world was starting to blur. "Dad," Lucas whispered, voice cracking. "Are you still with me? Please." For a moment, there was no answer. Then Wade shifted slightly, his jaw tight, his words faint but clear. "I'm here. Don't cry, son. Don't let them win." Lucas swallowed hard, blinking back tears. His father never used words carelessly. If he said, "Don't let them win," it meant this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. By the time the EMTs rolled up, Mark Shields had already backed away, standing stiff near the community mailbox as if nothing had happened. Arms crossed, chin raised, like he was waiting to be congratulated. When the paramedics loaded Wade into the back of the ambulance, Lucas climbed in without asking. No one tried to stop him. He never took his hand off his father's. But the ambulance wasn't the only vehicle that arrived. A squad car pulled up 5 minutes later, 2 uniformed officers stepping out with notepads and questions. They didn't approach Lucas. They didn't ask the man in the wheelchair what had happened. They walked straight over to Mark. Lucas saw them from inside the ambulance's open rear doors. Mark spoke with confidence, like he had rehearsed it. "He came at me, tried to stab me with a knife. I had to defend myself." Lucas's heart stopped. "What?" The officers exchanged glances. One began scribbling. The other asked calmly, "Where's the weapon?" Mark didn't flinch. "He hid it," he said flatly. "Maybe ditched it before you got here." He said it looking directly at Lucas, as if daring the boy to speak up. Inside the ambulance, Lucas's grip on his father's hand tightened. His stomach churned with disbelief. He wanted to scream. He wanted to shout that it was all a lie, that the man standing smugly in front of them wasn't a real officer, that the badge on his chest meant nothing, that his father hadn't raised a hand. But he didn't scream. He just stared, eyes burning, as the officers nodded and made more notes. No handcuffs, no weapon confiscation, no further questions. They let Mark walk. That night, under the pale green glow of hospital lights, Lucas sat beside Wade's bed in silence. Machines hummed softly. Monitors blinked. His father was stable, doctors said, but bruised. They called it neuromuscular shock. Said he was lucky it hadn't triggered something worse. Lucas didn't hear most of it. He just stared at the object in his hand, a worn military dog tag, cold and scratched from years of service. His father's name engraved on one side, blood type and service number on the other. Lucas didn't remember taking it from the top drawer back home, but here it was, curled inside his palm like a talisman. He ran his thumb over the etched metal, over the words that had always made him proud. Wade Hendricks, United States Marine Corps, Tased. His father had earned respect with every scar on his body, and yet, earlier today, a man in a fake uniform had stripped that away with a twitch of the wrist. And no one stopped him. Not the bystanders, not the officers, not even the law. Lucas didn't cry, not now, not here. But something inside him shifted. The boy who had wheeled his father out into the sunlight that morning didn't come back from the hospital. That boy was gone, left behind on the pavement in the shadow of flashing lights and shallow words. In his place sat someone else, someone quieter, sharper, someone who had seen too much. And in his chest, something had started to burn. By the next morning, Lucas had made a decision. He didn't wait for permission. He didn't ask for help. While his father lay sleeping under soft hospital lights, Lucas sat alone in the family living room, eyes locked on his phone. His hands trembled as he opened the video from the day before, the one his neighbor had sent him. It was short, just under 30 seconds. But it said everything. The sound of his father's voice, the sudden crackle, the fall, the scream. He uploaded it. The title was simple, "This is my dad." In the description he typed, "My father is a Marine. He uses a wheelchair. He's never broken the law. The man who attacked him is not a police officer. He's a fake. He tasered my dad for taking a walk. Please share this. This has to stop." He hit post and sat back, chest tight. Within hours, the numbers started climbing. First a few shares, then dozens, then hundreds. Veterans across the country picked it up. Comments poured in, some angry, some in disbelief, many offering support. By afternoon, local news stations had reached out for interviews. Lucas didn't say no. He showed up, clean shirt, quiet voice, holding his dad's military tag in one hand and speaking into the mic like someone who had lived a decade in a day. "This isn't just about my dad," he said. "This is about what happens when people like that man are allowed to pretend they're the law. It's not about uniforms. It's about truth." By day 2, national outlets were calling. A segment aired on primetime cable. Reporters stood in front of the neighborhood entrance, pointing at the sidewalk where it happened. Veterans groups held video panels demanding action. And on the third morning, something new appeared, spray painted in red across Mark Shields' front door, "Shame." On the garage, "Fake cop." His face had gone viral. Screenshots from the video, him standing in a makeshift uniform, taser still in hand, circulated online with one caption: "This man is not a cop. He's a threat." But while the internet roared, something else was happening in silence. That evening, Lucas stepped into his father's bedroom. The air was still, the blinds drawn. He didn't know what he was looking for. Maybe a photo, maybe a sign. What he found was an old wooden box tucked beneath the bed. It wasn't locked. It didn't need to be. Inside was a blade, military issue, worn but clean, carefully wrapped in a cloth. Along the handle, engraved in steel, were the words, "We never fall sitting down." Lucas stared at it for a long time. He didn't touch it at first. It wasn't just a knife. It was a chapter from a life he'd barely understood. Behind him, Wade's voice broke the silence. "I kept that for years," he said softly. "It was a gift from a friend who didn't make it back." Lucas turned. Wade was sitting upright in bed now, his eyes locked on the box. "I never carried it to scare anyone," he added, "only to remind myself. If anything ever happened to you, I'd be ready." Lucas finally looked up. "That's what he claimed, right? That you tried to use it on him?" Wade gave a tired smile. He saw it. He assumed fear. That's what cowards do. They see shadows and pretend they're danger. Lucas's gaze returned to the knife. This time, he reached out and picked it up. It felt heavier than it looked, not because of its weight, but because of what it meant. "I want to learn," he said quietly. Wade nodded, his voice steady but warm. "I'll teach you how to hold it, but more important..." He tapped Lucas gently on the temple. "You keep this sharp first." Lucas smiled, not wide, not forced, just enough to show that the fire inside him was no longer just pain. It was purpose. By Friday morning, the world was watching. News vans lined the curb outside the county courthouse, and the press conference had been scheduled for 10 a.m. sharp. Cameras rolled. Reporters jostled for front row spots. Inside, under the clean glare of fluorescent lights, the district attorney stepped up to the podium, flanked by uniformed officers and legal staff. He didn't waste time. After reviewing substantial video evidence and eyewitness testimony, he began, voice steady, "We can confirm that Mark Shields is not and has never been affiliated with any law enforcement agency. He is not certified, licensed, or trained as an officer of the law." A pause. The weight of that truth settled over the room like thunder waiting to break. Furthermore, Mr. Shields is now being formally charged with multiple offenses, including impersonation of an officer, unlawful use of a weapon, and assault. Flashbulbs popped. Journalists scribbled notes. One anchor leaned into the mic to whisper, "Finally." But the headlines were just the surface. That same day, officers executed a search warrant on Mark's residence. What they found inside wasn't just incriminating. It was surreal. Rows of imitation uniforms hung in the closet, vests, patches, pins. None of them real. He had built a display wall lined with so-called commendations, most of which turned out to be purchased from online novelty shops. On a bookshelf sat 3 binders marked Operations Log. They were filled with printed HOA letters Mark had written himself, signed with fake signatures, and stamped with seals he'd designed on his home computer. Each one made him look more legitimate, more official, more dangerous. And then came the most damning discovery of all: recordings. Several neighbors had submitted footage from their home security cameras. The angles varied, the quality shifted, but the moment of truth was unmistakable. No sound, but perfect clarity. Mark approaching. Mark shouting. Mark raising the taser. The flash. Wade collapsing. Lucas dropping to the ground, screaming, holding his father. Frame by frame, it played out like a silent confession. There was no weapon in Wade's hands. No threat. Just a man in a wheelchair, and a kid trying to protect him. Later that evening, the DA visited the hospital in person. Wade had been moved out of intensive care. The lines in his face were deeper now, but his posture still carried the quiet strength of someone who'd seen real war. The DA sat beside his bed and handed him a small packet. "It's the official charge summary," he said. "We're pressing forward with the case. The evidence your son captured changed everything. If that video didn't exist, we might have believed the uniform. We might have believed the badge. We might have believed a predator pretending to be a protector." He paused, then added quietly, "Your son's a hero." Wade nodded, emotion flickering in his eyes. He didn't speak much, but later that night, after the visitors left and the house was still, he wheeled himself out onto the porch under a sky just starting to turn orange. He didn't need to say much. The combat knife rested beside him on the wooden armrest, its blade sheathed, gleaming faintly in the last rays of sunlight. Not drawn, not brandished, just present, like history itself, heavy with memory. Lucas joined him, sitting on the step. They watched the street in silence. And then, softly, Wade broke it. "I spent years training for battle," he said, "for deserts and mountains, for places I couldn't pronounce. But I never expected it to follow me home. I never thought war would roll up to my driveway wearing fake patches and knock on my door." He didn't sound bitter. He sounded calm, like someone who had seen a storm, survived it, and now sat with its dust settling around him. He looked over at his son. "You kept your head," he said. "That's what wins." Lucas didn't answer. He didn't have to, because tonight, for the first time since it all began, the fight didn't feel like a losing one. It felt like the beginning of justice. When the trial finally began, the courtroom felt colder than usual. The air buzzed with tension, lawyers shuffling papers, reporters scribbling into notebooks, every seat filled. But when Lucas Hendricks took the stand, the room stilled. No rustling, no whispers, just silence. He walked with steady steps, wearing his father's old Marine tag tucked beneath a buttoned shirt. The judge watched him closely, not as a frightened child, not as a footnote in someone else's story, but as someone carrying the weight of truth. When Lucas spoke, it wasn't with anger. It wasn't with fear. His voice was calm, deliberate, every word chosen with care. He wasn't protecting anyone, Lucas said. He wasn't enforcing anything. He didn't ask questions, he just acted. And my dad never even raised his hand. The jury listened. The prosecutor didn't interrupt. Even the defense attorney lowered his pen. For 2 days, the court heard evidence, video footage, witness accounts, forensic analysis, the false badges, the fake documents, the stolen valor. And then, the sentence, 12 years. Mark Shields stood rigid as the judge read the charges. Impersonating an officer, assault on a disabled person, unlawful use of force, and criminal negligence. But it wasn't until the final line, with enhancement due to the victim's status and sustained harm, that something changed in his expression. His jaw twitched, his shoulders sagged just slightly. It had finally hit him. The vest didn't make him a protector. The badge didn't make him just. And control, once built on fear, crumbled when truth stepped forward. Outside the courthouse, the news traveled fast. Headlines ran across national channels. HOA imposter sentenced after tasing disabled veteran. Photos of Lucas and Wade, arm in arm, side by side, circulated with the caption, "Justice served." But the impact didn't stop there. Veteran organizations began rallying support. Donations poured in, not just money, but letters, supplies, outreach offers. Families from across the country shared similar stories. Lucas read them all, and instead of moving on, he decided to build something. He launched a foundation. Its mission was simple: protect people from those who abuse fake authority. The name was sharp, like a line drawn in sand, Stand Right. The foundation offered legal aid, educational resources, and public awareness campaigns. Within weeks, local schools invited Lucas to speak. Within months, 2 states introduced legislation mandating clearer regulation of community enforcement personnel. And yet, the most powerful words came from Wade. During an interview with a national journalist, one who had followed the case from the beginning, Wade was asked a question that seemed simple. "Why did you carry that combat knife?" He smiled, slow and thoughtful. "I went through a war," he said, "but the world didn't become safer when I came home. That knife, it's not a weapon. It's a memory, a promise, a reminder that just because you sit doesn't mean you stop standing for what's right." The clip aired during prime time. It was replayed millions of times because people didn't just see a man in a wheelchair. They saw strength without volume, courage without spectacle, and a son who turned witness into warrior. Not with anger, but with truth. 2 weeks after the sentencing, Lucas stood stiffly under the bright white awning of the school auditorium, his hands clasped behind his back as the principal droned on into the microphone. Parents, teachers, and students sat shoulder to shoulder in metal folding chairs, half listening as buzzwords echoed off the walls. Civic duty, moral leadership, courage under pressure. Lucas kept his eyes forward, expression unreadable. The entire ceremony was built around him, and yet, not a single person on that stage had been there when it mattered. No one from the school called during the hospital stay. No counselor checked in when his father was attacked. But now, here they were, beaming, handing out certificates, inviting cameras. Lucas could feel the weight of their sudden pride, and yet it rang hollow. He took the certificate without a smile. After the ceremony, as students began to scatter, one teacher broke from the crowd. Mr. Cohen, retired history teacher, Vietnam vet, and the kind of man who never applauded unless he meant it, walked right up to Lucas and extended a firm hand. "I served," he said quietly. "I saw a lot of heroes come home, but I've never seen a son stand for his father like that." Lucas nodded. He wanted to say thank you. He wanted to smile. But his chest tightened. Because behind all the speeches and handshakes, something darker had begun to take shape. Just 1 week earlier, the neighborhood had voted in a new HOA president, Greg Hodges. He wasn't a stranger. Everyone knew Greg. He hosted summer barbecues and played poker on Fridays. He also happened to be Mark Shield's closest friend. And Greg wasted no time. The first letter arrived folded in a crisp white envelope. Per HOA policy 4.2, your father's mobility device exceeds the approved aesthetic for front-facing porches. Lucas read it twice, then a second letter. Recent media presence has generated elevated noise levels. Interviews must be scheduled off-site. A third, your mailbox is out of compliance with Design Standard 7B. Replacement is required. And finally, your lease agreement will undergo reassessment due to pending policy changes. You may be contacted regarding future occupancy. Each notice was signed at the bottom with a tight, deliberate script. Greg Hodges, President, Westbridge, HOA. Lucas felt his stomach sink with every line. It wasn't random. It wasn't coincidence. It was retaliation, veiled in bylaws and fine print. At the next community meeting, Greg didn't bother hiding his intent. Standing behind a folding table with a binder full of violations, he scanned the crowd and spoke in a tone that danced on the edge of mockery. "This neighborhood needs order," he said, "not drama. And frankly, some families seem to think their hardships give them special immunity from the rules." He didn't say their name. He didn't have to. Then came the words that made Lucas's jaw tighten. "We all respect our veterans, but let's be clear. Being in a wheelchair doesn't make someone above the law. No one gets a free pass because of sympathy points." Gasps rippled across the room. A few neighbors shifted in their seats. Others stared at the floor. Wade wasn't there. His back had been acting up, but Lucas was. He stood in the back, arms folded, watching Greg with eyes that didn't blink. Greg Hodges smiled thinly and closed his binder. "I'm here to restore balance," he said, "and I won't let emotion get in the way of what's best for this community." Lucas didn't move. He didn't speak. But inside, something sharpened. This wasn't over. It had just changed form. Wade listened without interrupting. Lucas read each HOA notice aloud. One about the porch, another about noise, one targeting their mailbox, and finally the threat of lease review. Wade said nothing. He sat at the kitchen table, running a whetstone along the edge of his old combat knife, not with aggression, but with intention. It was a ritual, a signal. He knew what this meant. A different kind of battle was coming. When the final letter hit the counter, Wade looked up. "We're not leaving," he said simply. "This is our home. We built a life here. They don't get to erase that with paper and signatures. Then he picked up his phone. 3 calls. One to a fellow Marine turned attorney, one to a federal officer he trusted, one to a senator who'd once promised, "If you call, I answer." He answered. 4 days later, black SUVs rolled into the community. Federal inspectors stepped out in Navy jackets and began their review: documents, meetings, policies. Within hours, they found inconsistencies. By the end of day 2, they had evidence. Greg Hodges had fabricated several HOA rules, enforcing personal bias under the guise of policy. None of it had been approved. Some of it had even been backdated. The neighbors reacted fast. A petition started. Over half the residents signed to remove him. Greg resisted. He called it procedural confusion. But the sight of federal staff walking through his front yard, logging emails and scanning files, ended that. He tried deleting messages, but the digital trail was already saved. The HOA called a final meeting. It was packed. Wade rolled in beside his son and made his way to the front. At the center of the room, he stopped. Then slowly, with Lucas's help, Wade stood. Gasps moved through the crowd as silence fell. He faced the board, voice steady. "You tried to remove me, but I'm still here. Not because I'm loud, not because I had power, because I don't back down." He scanned the room. "I didn't back down in Afghanistan. I didn't back down when a man with a fake badge used a weapon on me, and I won't back down from an HOA that forgot how to treat people with dignity." There were no cheers, just stillness. But something shifted. That night, Wade didn't just stand on his legs. He stood his ground. The Hendricks story made its way into national headlines. News anchors recapped the courtroom victory. Interviews replayed footage of the HOA meeting where Wade had stood to speak. The Department of Defense honored Lucas with a Civil Valor Commendation, a rare award, especially for someone his age. The citation read, "For courage, clarity, and the protection of others in the face of domestic injustice." A week later, a package arrived for Wade, an official certificate signed by members of Congress, acknowledging his resilience, leadership, and service both in uniform and at home. But that wasn't what changed him. That moment came quietly, without cameras or applause. It was just after sunset. The backyard was calm, lit only by the warm amber of the porch light and the last colors fading from the sky. Wade sat in his wheelchair beneath the old oak tree, a light breeze shifting the leaves overhead. Lucas sat next to him, legs crossed, holding a tablet in his hands. He had spent most of the day reading emails, hundreds of them, and now, as cicadas hummed in the distance, he read one aloud. "Dear Mr. Hendricks, I'm the father of a disabled child. After watching your son's video and following your story, I took my case back to court. The charges against my son were dropped today. I just wanted to say thank you for giving me hope." Wade didn't respond right away. He looked out into the yard, letting the weight of those words sink in. "How many?" he asked quietly. Lucas tilted the screen toward him. "Just today, 219 messages." Wade nodded slowly, not with pride, but with quiet acceptance. "Then it was worth it," he said. He didn't need to say more. On his belt, looped through the side of his chair, was the same combat knife, sheathed, silent. It no longer symbolized battle, not war, not pain. It wasn't a weapon anymore. It was memory, a reminder, not of what had happened, but of what endured. That sometimes standing up isn't about legs. It's about refusing to move when everything pushes you to. That even when the world feels against you, you can hold your ground, as long as someone stands beside you. Lucas set the tablet down and leaned back in his chair, looking up at the stars starting to pierce the night sky. Wade glanced over and gave a faint smile. "You did good, son." Lucas didn't answer. He just nodded. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of everything they'd been through, everything they'd overcome, and everything they now carried together. And as the lights from neighboring homes flickered on and the wind whispered through the trees, the Hendricks family sat in their own kind of peace. Not because the fight was easy, but because they had never backed down.